Welcome to Adobe We, the Women Executive Leadership Series. In this show, we sit down with senior leaders at Adobe. We want to explore our professional experiences and the challenges we've overcome to empower women wherever they are. I'm Maria Yap, and I'm here with Janet and Mala, and we're talking about exercising your seat at the table. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Janet Boss, and I run global sales operations for our consumer and business organization. And basically, I do everything but the selling, so planning for the sales team motions.
Very cool.
I'm Mala, and I run product marketing for Creative Cloud. And what that means is I'm responsible to figure out what the growth for the business can be over a long term. It could be a product strategy. It could be looking at competition to figure out what the value we deliver, pricing, where do we sell it. So I think about the big unlocks for the business and let everybody else do it. Not really. I actually do some of the work too. But yeah.
Awesome. So what does it mean to sit at the table?
I guess it's two things. One is, literally having a presence in a high stakes meeting. And then two is being able to voice your point of view and your recommendations, right? So literally, but then being able to assert yourself in the discussion.
Yeah. And Mala, how do you make room for people at the table?
I think being at Adobe and being just part of these conversations has made me more conscious about leaders making an effort. Mm-hmm. So what I've, over the years, I think, started to do is if I feel somebody hasn't spoken up in a room, or if I see somebody trying to speak up, but others have spoken, on top of them, which happens all the time, is draw the attention to that person and request them to speak. And I've gotten more deliberate about it over the years. Mm-hmm. And I think the other thing for me is, this is more on a personal level, I really believe in the tenet of doing what's right and not what feels good. Mm-hmm. And that has always been my guiding force of drawing out what I think is right, even if it's uncomfortable.
I think about it as not only, physically, being at the table. There's many times where we book a conference room and there's not enough chairs. And I'm always like, no, everyone has to sit at the table. And in fact, when I was doing the renovations on our floor, I refused to have any of those seats on the side because I felt like that doesn't help you be at the table if there's a seat off to the side. And so I made sure that no, we're going to bring everyone at the table, so you at least have a physical seat there. But then you also want to make sure that you're kind of finding ways to draw people out and participate into the conversation as well. Have you been in situations where you've been like the only woman in the room, or the minority?
I have. Yeah. For sure. I think it's becoming less and less common because of efforts like Adobe and Women that are doing a lot of outreach and making sure that women in the organization see opportunities and take advantage of those, right? So I do see it changing.
Mm-hmm. The place where I've experienced it probably the most is when I travel to India. Mm-hmm. I feel because when I joined Adobe, it was in product marketing. I think product marketing as a function typically has more women. So I didn't feel like I was standing out or sticking out in the context of product marketing or working with corporate marketing. But every time I've traveled to India and met with the teams there, I've often been in a meeting where there's engineers and product managers and maybe one woman who's in the engineering team or one woman who's in the product management team. And that's where I become more conscious of it. And feel like there's more of an opportunity to draw women out in those conversations.
How do you try to bring those women out?
There's a couple of things that I've been trying to make traction on. One is when I'm there, I always, I think many of us here, I host, like a women get together and have conversations with them. But more than that, what I've been doing is spending time with the leadership there and asking them to, the men in particular, most of the leaders there are men, making them more aware of drawing those women out in conversations?
For me and my journey, I've had a double whammy in being a woman and being an introvert. Right? So my natural tendency is I'm inside my head, you know, I'll be thinking through things, I'll have ideas, but I'm not necessarily going to voice them. I've had, you know, managers, you know, people that I've reported into that have recognized that and just make sure that I, you know, have a voice.
I think you have to find times where you can make space for, you know, introverts or even women that, you know, think that I'm just there to either take the notes or, you know, not be as active and to actually ask them their opinion. And I remember a few times being in a meeting where we're supposed to like make a decision, and rather than me making the decision, I'll literally kind of go around the room and sort of ask people what their opinion, like, should we do this or shouldn't we do this? And it always surprises me when I like turn to someone, and oftentimes it is the woman in the room, and she'll be like, you really, you want my opinion? And I'm like, yes, I really do. We all want to hear your opinion. And they're sort of like surprised. And I think it's unfortunate that we don't try to do that more so that they don't feel so surprised or sort of like, you really want to hear my voice.
Absolutely. And, you know, if you think about, you know, your role when you go into a meeting, right? Why be in the meeting if you're not going to have a point of view and if you're not going to share the point of view? That's the whole point of being there, right?
So one of my life-changing books is called Quiet.
Oh, I love that book.
The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking by Susan Cain. I learned about introverts. It's not that we don't like people, because it might seem that, you know, extroverts like people and introverts don't like people. It's just that we prefer, like, you know, smaller group conversations, deeper one-on-one relationships, and that it's a bit more draining on us. Our energies get drained from it versus getting energies from it. And so from there, I have to sort of like plan out my day or space out time, knowing that if I'm going to be in a large group or if I'm going to be speaking publicly, I need to then like maybe not cry in the stall of the bathroom, but I just need to kind of quiet myself down and just sort of like give myself the room to sort of re-energize myself.
But I think the other piece, which I try to practice as an introvert, is reflection on what you did right, what you could do better, is something I feel introverts just we have that built into us.
Yeah, so it seems like it's easier for you to settle down.
So as a business leader, that is such a superpower. If we can tap into that and bring it to bear in our, you know, in our daily work. I think, I don't know if people do that, but I would recommend that.
But what do you think is one of your superpowers as an introvert?
So I think it's listening. You know, people, well, I'm a good listener, and people know that about me, and they seek me out and tell me things, which is helpful, right? And also I think just, you know, that there's that, it's sort of an element of EQ, an emotional quotient, right? Just being able to engage with others and have positive working relationships. So I think, you know, in a strange way, I was a successful salesperson because of that. Yeah.
For me, it's processing, you know, sort of like a little bit like listening and meditation, but it's sort of like, it takes me more time to sort of like take everything in and process it. And I can literally feel the cogs in my brain going, working away. And then I can make these really interesting connections that most people can't, because it's like, well, how did you connect that and that and that? And it's like, that's because that's how my brain works. I can't in the moment, because I'm not that kind of problem solver, like I can't solve it in the moment, but I can sort of take all these really complex thoughts and see patterns between them and then come up with that solution.
Maria. I'm so like that.
Same here. And it's interesting that you say that. My husband, who has the opposite personality to me, was saying, Janet, I think faster than you, but you think more deeply. And that's exactly what you said, right? So everyone has their strengths. So it's just bringing them to bear.
I was going to share a funny yet very important experience that I had. Typically, I think people don't think of me as being shy. And although I'm an introvert, when I share that, people are surprised because they think I'm an extrovert. And, although I was brought up in India, I've never sort of hesitated in sharing my opinion, especially if I'm the person who's leading a project. I've always thought of it as I'm responsible. I realized, unbeknownst to myself, that when I was not in the driver's seat, when somebody else was driving a project. And if I had a different opinion, I wasn't likely to speak up because I felt like, actually, this is not my thing, this is their thing. One of my reviews, the feedback I got was that I'm not speaking up enough. And the context was specifically in op staff meetings. And what I realized is I was not speaking up, especially in the context of if one of the op staff members was saying something that I disagreed with, because I felt it was disrespectful to challenge them in the open, or, they were more senior to me, and I felt like, well, they've got to know what they're talking about. It was just sort of respect that held me back. Right. So I happened to have a conversation with Shantanu, actually, and I asked him about it. I said, listen, I've got this feedback, and especially when you're saying something, because I respect you, you're a very senior leader, I don't want you to lose face, and therefore I don't want to challenge you in the context of the meeting. Right. And he gave me some really great advice that I remember till today, and I shared broadly. He said, if you're not comfortable, Mala, it's okay. Don't force yourself to do something that's not you. And his immediate follow-on was, however, the fact that you're in the room and at the table, I actually value your opinion and I'd like to hear from you. So feel free to share that opinion, because I don't need an audience. Yeah. And that gave me permission to start sharing my perspective. It was incredibly freeing. I mean, it took me some time to figure out how to go about it, which is, it's not easy to share a different perspective in the moment. Right. And that was something I had to practice.
Yeah. Another thing I'm picking up on in that story is the fact that, well, as you progress in your career, you become more of a generalist, right, and less specialized. And then you do pivot to recognizing, I can add value across all of these different functional lines, right? Yeah. Versus kind of having this more narrow domain expertise. Yeah. I'm not sure if that's what was going on for you, but I think I've had that journey of realizing, I can flex in a bunch of different areas. Yeah. And I should.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you said something as well, Mala, about didn't want to come off disrespecting by challenging. Yes. I remember being in a review with Shantanu one time, and he was asking a question about, like, well, does the product do this or does it do that? And I just heard it as like he was asking a question, and I simply responded and said, "Oh no, Shantanu, we decided to not do that functionality. We're doing this other functionality instead." And I didn't think anything of it. But then later that day, the senior director of engineering comes over to me and he's like, "You defended us." And I'm like, I did what? And he was like, "You defended us. You didn't throw us under the bus and say, the engineering team didn't do that feature because, they're lazy." And I said, "I didn't think I was defending you. I thought I was just simply answering a question."
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that people have a very different perspective on what they're doing. I'm genuinely just correcting information or responding to a question, or, like you're saying, giving your honest feedback, not being disrespectful.
Right. And why would your response be different depending on the person you're talking to?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So what I've personally found, and I'm a big believer in practice makes perfect. And what I've personally found is I've written down over the years sort of certain handles on how to sort of
introduce that.
How to introduce a different point of view.
Oh, okay.
Or a nuanced
Tell
point
us
of
more,
view.
Mala.
I think it really has to be, I feel, whatever makes you comfortable. But for me, it's, I think the popular one is yes and. I personally don't like it, because for me, that's not, like, my brain doesn't work that way. So you have to figure out what your handle is. For me, the handle is, that's a really interesting perspective. I've been thinking about this deeply over the last couple of days in preparing for this meeting. And here's what I specifically looked at. So sort of bringing a way to acknowledge what the person has said respectfully, but also not just saying I have a different point of view, but I've actually been looking at this more deeply. And here's what I learned. And because of this, my point of view is slightly different, or just adds more to your point of view. So just create language that allows you to have a different perspective and practice it. Because sometimes what I find is I get tongue-tied, because you could be in a meeting, the room's getting all worked up, and you're like, I don't know how to interject. Sometimes you could raise your hand. Yeah. But I think practicing some handles, it really helps.
That's very
So I think I have one handle, which is I
Yes.
have a slightly different lens on that, and then kind of leading in.
That's great.
So Janet, has there been anyone that's been particularly helpful in your career?
I have had so many amazing managers at Adobe, and with a 20-year tenure, I guess it's not that surprising, but I feel incredibly grateful for that. And what I would say all of them have done is really seen something in me that I didn't necessarily even see in myself, and brought that out, right? So I think that's what I try to do with my team is just help them see the potential that they have and encourage them to take risks and keep setting aggressive goals for themselves and their career.
Yeah, I agree. I've also had very great managers at Adobe and in general in life. I feel I've been fortunate to have great mentors. I got feedback from one of my managers who said, it's not that you don't want to be yourself and not be authentic. If you're intense, you're intense, and that's you, right? But you have to be conscious of the impact that you're having, because you're no longer the group manager or the individual contributor. You're now a director, or you're a senior director, or you're a VP. And what you say has a certain, you might be saying the exact same thing, the exact same tone, but the impact of that lands very, very differently, and therefore be more aware of that. Because you might be unconsciously driving people away from speaking up, given how you show up and how you're engaging, because you're just bringing all of you in the way you used to when you were an individual contributor.
So you felt like that transition for you happened when you sort of switched from group manager to director?
To director. That's when it really happened. And I feel that feedback was so important, because I tend to be in the moment. I'm just kind of, in the flow. It made me more conscious, and even if I can't hold myself back sometimes, I will go back and circle back with the person and help them understand where I came from. So that's helped me become more, I think, aware.
Do you ever try to put yourself in a situation where you go and ask for feedback?
Yes.
And how do you do that? Because I think that's
yeah.
another thing that I think a lot of women or people just don't think to do. It's like, how do you ask someone for feedback?
Yes, so that is so important, and I think especially for women, my observation is women tend to take feedback personally. I have been in many situations where I'm giving feedback, and I have the woman in front of me tearing up, and not able to, not sure how to process it. I have been at the receiving end of feedback where I'm kind of, unsure of, what this means for me.
Right.
So what I've learned over time, and I've tried to do over time, is think of feedback as a way to get better. So it's not about what I'm not doing well.
Right.
It's how do I do what I'm doing better, and how can I be more valuable to you as my manager? And I think that's something we should be seeking out.
I was just going to add, I think what can be effective is if you're working on specific things, right? Like, okay, I'm working on storytelling, so I'm going to identify a few colleagues that are particularly good at that, and tell them, hey, this is what I'm working on, and I'd like you to observe and give me feedback, right? So it's very specific, and it's within their.
No, totally. I mean, because when you say feedback, I automatically start breaking out in hives because I think it's really hard because I always think it's like a criticism. I'm already so critical of everything that I'm doing already in my own head. So, but I have started to learn that if you ask for something specific, it's actually easier. Or you ask for how can it be better, that's actually easier to hear.
I think it's as important for the recipient of the feedback to break down the feedback and decide if they want to accept it or not.
I think that's so important. I think in a lot of ways feedback gets, I'm still shaking, gets a bad rap, but it's sort of like, it's meant to be something richer than that. And it's meant to really open up a conversation and a dialogue that just don't normally happen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
So what do you think are some of the best attributes of women leaders? Like what do women uniquely bring to the table as a leader?
Generally speaking, I think women are good listeners. I think we are open. I think we're collaborative and good at bringing people along.
Yeah.
with our vision.
Yeah, I find that teamwork is something, we tend to like to, we're the gatherers in the, not the hunters. We tend to like to bring people together and do things as a team and together a lot more.
Multitaskers is what comes to mind. Nurturing. And I think as leaders in particular, that's something that's so natural to us. We could bring that more to bear. I know I don't do enough of it. And when I think my team experiences it, they value it. So I've become more conscious about bringing that to bear. Because sometimes we are trying to be the leader, which we have to be. But
on that note, empathy.
yes.
I think empathy is a big strength that women bring to the table, right?
Yes, and understanding. Yeah, listening and understanding.
Yeah, I've recently heard a definition of leadership being that you manage work, but you develop people. So it's not about managing people.
Right.
It's actually about developing people. And then when you think about it that way, then your points about being more nurturing, bringing people along, is really what we should be doing as leaders. And the management part is really managing the execution of the tasks at hand, but it's developing the people. And I think too many times people look at it as like managing people.
Right.
And not actually looking at them as how do you develop them into stronger leaders.
I love that.
So women can face different challenges in the workplace, access to opportunities, promotions, a network. So what can we as leaders do to help them with these challenges?
I think as leaders, listening to what the challenge is they believe they face, because sometimes it may not be a real challenge, or it may be a challenge that is addressable. And I'm going to give you an example. I'm sure she'll be okay with this. I needed a leader to run Creative Cloud product management. And I really thought that she could be a great fit. So I broached her, about the opportunity, and her first response was no, right? Because it'll be a massive commitment, I have to balance, and she has little kids, and they were even littler at the time, even younger at the time, and so she was really concerned about the work-life balance, as well as just the pressure that comes with, delivering things at a certain pace. And so I sat down and tried to understand what the specific concern was. And what I realized, it was really about being able to be there for her family when they needed her. So we sat down and spoke through it. And then I really wanted her to not just feel it was me who was pushing her into it, but there were other people supporting it as well, right? So I requested her and I requested other leaders to speak to her and share with her directly why we thought she'd be good for the job and how we could support her. And it really made her realize how valued she was, but more importantly, she had the support of the leaders. And I think just that effort that I put into it and took the time to listen and understand, and then was able to give the feedback to the other leaders to factor that into their conversation with her and help her feel like she could be supported and she should stretch because the company is willing for her to do this. It worked, and it worked out, and she took the opportunity. But if we hadn't done that extra legwork, she would not have given herself that opportunity. And so I think that listening and understanding, because sometimes we tell ourselves stories that we think we can't get out of, but somebody else might have a solution or might be willing to help, or there might be a creative way to address it.
I've got two stories to add to your one. I remember she was a group manager, and she wanted to know, like, how hard is it to be the director? Like, is it like 10 times harder, like 100 times harder? And I looked at her and I'm like, it's not harder. Like, if you can do this job, you can totally do that next job. And she was sort of like, she had this image in her head of like, that it must be this like crazy other harder thing. And I was like, oh, no, it's not. And I was like, you could totally do this. And so she still says to me today, she's like, I would have never gone for it if you didn't just say to me, go for it, try it, you'll be fine. You can still balance all your life and everything. But if you're not sure, ask. And then another one was a product manager, and she came to me and she's like, she wanted to get more like more public exposure, maybe speak more, out there externally. And I took that in, and like within like a week or two, I was like, oh, I signed you up. You're going to give the keynote at the Photoshop conference in Brazil. And she's like, I didn't ask for that. I was like, but you did. You said you want to put yourself out there. You want to prepare yourself. And from there, she got like hooked. She realized that she could do it. And then she kept going from there.
When somebody trusts you and sort of is willing to place a bet on you,
Right.
and not just place a bet, but support you through that, right? You can rise to the occasions. As leaders, I think that's what we need to do more of, is not just place a bet on people, but do the second part, which is provide them the support that they need and help them think through how they could rise to the occasion.
When I was talking about the great managers that I've had at Adobe and how they, saw something in me that I didn't see in myself, it was this, helping me realize that I could take on more, even though I was, raising my family and, trying to balance and all of that. And yeah, so, why does it sometimes take someone else to ask the question or to point it out?
Right.
I don't know the answer.
So I often think, if I could talk to my younger self, what would I tell her? And I think the biggest thing that I've learned is I should have embraced myself more when I was younger. That I shouldn't have wanted to be the extrovert, the one that had the MBA, more technical, that I should have just embraced who I was and then gone from there. I think I discovered that in my journey through the last 22 years at Adobe, but I sort of wish that I didn't live with all those insecurities, probably for the first half of my career. But I do know that when I finally did accept myself for who I was, things kind of changed. I had a different attitude. I think I showed up better at work, but it was a hard process to get to. So what do you wish you could tell your younger self?
So mine is similar. What I would tell my younger self is bring your whole self to work, because that person is amazing and that's the person that people want to work with, versus a compartmentalized version of who you think you should be. And the thing about that that's tough, or was tough for me, is it felt very vulnerable, right? Because I want to present a curated view of who I am. If I present the real view of who I am, how will that impact? But that's what people want. That's who people want to work with.
I'm just going to second and third that. Be you.
Ooh. Wow, this time's gone really quickly. Thank you so much for having this conversation and sharing, your thoughts about, what it means to be a senior leader at Adobe, exercising your seat at the table, whether it's spending time to really listen and process through what people are saying, to, inviting feedback and providing these sort of conversational handles to sort of like, introduce or pass on the conversation. It was really lovely having this conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
It was amazing. Thanks.